I was the only passenger on that midnight train, or so I thought. But when the doors opened, I stepped into a station that hadn't existed in 20 years, and I was never supposed to leave. The last train ride. Rain tapped gently against the train windows like skeletal fingers echoing through the near-empty station. Thomas Reed adjusted his coat collar and glanced at the flickering overhead light. Midnight. The last train of the night was late, and the platform was deserted, save for the vending machine humming its lonely tune. He checked his phone. No signal. Again. For some reason, this small rural stop on the edge of the city always seemed to exist outside the rest of the world. He had only stopped here because his meeting ran late and the earlier train was full. The train screeched in, slower than usual, as if dragging invisible weight. A single car, old-fashioned and dimly lit, waited with its doors hissing open. Thomas hesitated. It didn't look like any modern train he'd ever seen, but his options were limited. A motel nearby looked abandoned, and he wasn't about to sleep on a bench. He stepped in. Inside, the car was warm and oddly quiet. The lights flickered above plush red seats, vintage-style walls, and brass railings. No other passengers, not even a conductor, just rows of empty seats and a musty scent of dust and old wood. Thomas sat near the window, glancing outside. The train pulled away, swallowed by darkness. For the first time, he noticed the sound, or lack thereof. No hum of the engine, no clicking of the tracks beneath, just silence. After a few minutes, he tried to distract himself, checked his phone again. Still, no signal. "Excuse me," he called out, standing up. "Is there anyone here?" No answer. He moved between the cars, each one as empty as the last. Some had peeling wallpaper and torn seats. Others looked brand new, untouched by time. It felt like stepping through different decades, 1960s, 1980s, then back to the early 2000s. His steps slowed when he reached a car lit only by a single overhead bulb, swinging back and forth. Beneath it, something shimmered on the floor, a small silver locket. He picked it up, and inside was a faded photo of a girl, no older than 10, smiling in a school uniform. Thomas turned suddenly, feeling watched, but there was no one. He returned to his seat, more unsettled than before. The train didn't stop. It should have reached the next station by now, but outside, there was nothing, just endless woods and black sky. He checked his watch. 1:13 a.m. The trip was only supposed to take 45 minutes. The intercom crackled to life. Next stop, Graven Hollow. The voice was scratchy, mechanical, and unfamiliar. Thomas frowned. Graven Hollow. He'd never heard of that place before. He opened his phone to check the map, but the screen was frozen. Then it turned off. Suddenly, the train jolted, as if it hit something, but there was no impact sound, just that sickening jolt. He looked out the window. A row of figures stood in the trees, pale, motionless, their faces blurred like smudged paint. Watching, Thomas stumbled back from the window, heart pounding. The intercom spoke again, clearer this time. "You left something behind." Thomas, he froze. That wasn't part of any automated announcement. No one should know his name. The train began to slow, creaking against the tracks, as a faint glow appeared ahead. A station, old, crumbling, overgrown with weeds and rust. The sign overhead read, "Graven Hollow, Est 1903. The train stopped. Doors opened with a hiss, and then nothing. No one boarded, no conductor, no voice. Thomas didn't move. He didn't want to. Something about this place screamed wrong. But then he saw it. A girl, standing at the far end of the platform. The same girl from the locket. She stared at him, eyes wide, hand outstretched, as if begging him to follow, and behind her, shadows began to move. Thomas hesitated, his breath fogging the cold glass of the window. The girl stood still under the flickering station light, her pale face frozen in a silent plea. She wore a white dress with faded blue ribbons, her hair curled neatly to her shoulders. Though she looked like a child from decades ago, something about her presence felt strangely current, as if time had no meaning here. The platform was silent, except for the soft hum of the train, which now sat completely still. No announcements, no conductor, no other passengers. Just him and her. Against his better judgment, Thomas stood and stepped out onto the platform. The air was thick, damp, and colder than he expected. The scent of old wood, rust, and wet leaves lingered in the air. The station was a shell of what it once had been. Signs rusted, benches cracked, walls covered in ivy and grime. It didn't make sense. No modern train should have stopped at a place like this. He glanced around. "Hello?" he called out, his voice echoing too far. No response. The girl didn't move. Her hand remained outstretched, beckoning him to follow. Thomas took a cautious step forward. "Are you lost?" he asked gently. She tilted her head slightly, her expression unreadable. Then, without a word, she turned and walked away, toward a narrow stairwell at the end of the platform, partially hidden behind an old ticket booth. "Wait!" Thomas hurried after her, boots crunching against gravel and broken glass. He followed her down the steps, the sounds of the train fading behind him. The stairwell descended into darkness, lit only by occasional wall sconces barely clinging to life. His phone was still dead, and there was no emergency lighting. The girl rounded a corner and vanished. Thomas followed quickly, entering a hallway that seemed impossibly long for an old station. The tiles were cracked, and old posters peeled from the walls, ads for movies from the 1950s, government warnings from the Cold War era. He passed broken vending machines, shattered clocks, and an old payphone that suddenly rang as he walked by. He jumped. The payphone rang again. He stared at it, debating whether to answer. Against every instinct, he lifted the receiver. "Thomas," a voice whispered on the other end. Female. Familiar. "You shouldn't have come back." His blood ran cold. "Who is this?" A soft sob answered. Then silence. The line went dead. He replaced the receiver slowly, heart racing. He continued down the hallway until he saw movement ahead. Flickering candlelight, coming from a large open chamber. He stepped inside and found what appeared to be an old waiting room. Dust-covered benches lined the walls. A fireplace, long extinguished, stood cold in the corner. And in the center, sitting quietly at a table, was the girl. She was coloring with a worn-down crayon, her face lit softly by the candle. Thomas approached cautiously. "Hey, are you okay? Where are your parents?" She looked up at him with sad, distant eyes. "They don't come here anymore," she said quietly. "No, one does. Not since the train." "What do you mean?" Her voice dropped to a whisper. It wasn't supposed to stop here. Thomas knelt beside her. What happened here? She looked at him for a long moment, then pointed to the far wall. There, hanging crookedly, was a black and white photograph. He stood and walked over to it, brushing away cobwebs. It was a group photo of train passengers. Most were smiling. A few children in front. Conductors in the back. One of the children was her. He stepped back, stunned. The date beneath the photo read, October 14th, 2005. That was exactly 20 years ago. The girl spoke again. We were going home, but the train never made it. It stopped here, and then it didn't leave. Thomas turned to her. What do you mean it didn't leave? She stood now, slowly, and her voice trembled. It just stayed. And then the lights went out, and everyone disappeared. A chill ran through his spine. I wasn't supposed to be on that train, she said. I snuck on to surprise my dad. He worked in the city. She looked at Thomas with a haunted expression. But no one ever found me. His mind reeled. That can't be. There would have been a search. News reports. There were, she said. But the station was already gone. It was shut down years before. That couldn't be possible. He turned to leave, but the hallway behind him was now gone. Just a wall of cracked brick. The way he came had vanished. Panic settled in his chest. How do I leave? He asked. I need to get back. The girl looked down. You have to remember. Remember what? She hesitated. The train brings back people who forgot, didn't understand. I don't belong here, he insisted. I'm not supposed to be here. She stepped closer. Then why did you come back? Thomas froze. I didn't, but he did. He realized suddenly this wasn't his first time. Here, something buried deep in his memory clawed its way to the surface. A station, a little girl, a train that never reached its stop. His head throbbed. Images flickered. Him as a child, sitting next to a girl in a white dress, playing cards on a train. A sudden stop. Screams. Then nothing. He stumbled back, clutching his head. No, you were on that train, she whispered. We both were. He looked at her, eyes wide. But I made it home. She shook her head. You left, but part of you never did. The candle flickered violently. A low rumble echoed through the chamber, the sound of a train. The girl's expression changed. They're coming. Who? She didn't answer. The chamber darkened as shadows poured in through cracks in the wall, crawling across the floor like spilled ink. Thomas backed away as distant footsteps echoed down invisible hallways. The girl turned to him one last time. You have to find what you left behind, she said, voice trembling. Before they do. Then she vanished. The candle went out, and Thomas was alone in the dark. The darkness pressed in like a living thing. Thomas stood frozen, the silence around him too deep, like the world itself had stopped breathing. He blinked several times, hoping his eyes would adjust, but the blackness remained absolute. Every instinct screamed for him to run, but there was nowhere to go. Then came the sound, a soft shuffle, like feet dragging across stone. Hello, he called out, voice trembling. No reply, just the shuffle again, this time closer. He stepped backward, bumping into a cold, damp wall. His hands fumbled in the dark until he found a narrow passage, a tunnel. It sloped downward, the air colder than ever. He had no choice. If he stayed, whatever was in that chamber would find him. He entered the tunnel. The air smelled of old metal and mildew. Water dripped from the ceiling, echoing like a ticking clock. As he moved deeper, a dim, unnatural glow began to appear ahead, blue and ghostly, like moonlight underwater. The tunnel opened into a wide corridor, lined with old railway equipment, rusted carts, broken tools, and shattered lanterns. Among the debris were old suitcases, some still upright as if waiting to be claimed. Tags dangled from them, covered in dust. One caught his eye. It had his name, Thomas Ridley. He stepped forward and picked it up. It wasn't his current address. It was his childhood home, the one they'd left when he was 10. The suitcase was small, the kind a child might carry. He unzipped it slowly. Inside was a faded red hoodie, a plastic toy train, and a photo. He lifted the photo with shaking hands. It was him and the girl. They stood side by side on a train platform, smiling. Behind them was the very station he now stood in, the same crooked sign, the same cracked tiles. The back of the photo read, October 13th, 2005, last trip together. A cold wave ran down his spine. Why couldn't he remember this? Footsteps echoed behind him. He turned, but the corridor was empty. Then he heard it, whispers. They came from all directions, layered and impossible to decipher. Dozens of voices, maybe hundreds. Soft, urgent. Find it. Before they do, what did you leave behind? You forgot us. The whispers became louder, overlapping. He clutched the suitcase, backing away. Suddenly, one of the suitcases beside him burst open with a loud snap. Papers flew out, pages of journals and drawings. Another case fell over, then another, until the entire corridor became a whirlwind of forgotten belongings and memories. Shadow moved at the end of the corridor, tall, thin, and gliding silently. Thomas ran. He darted through the clutter, down another tunnel, his feet slamming against the wet ground. The whispers chased him, growing louder, harsher. The walls closed in. The air thinned. He stumbled into another chamber, this one circular, like a meeting room long buried. In the center was a round table with chairs arranged neatly, each with a nameplate. He approached one. It read, Sarah Whitmore. Another, Daniel Cross. Each name was familiar. Schoolmates, neighbors. Then he found his own, Thomas Ridley. His chair was pulled slightly out, as if waiting for him. He sat, breathing heavily. Suddenly, lights flickered on above, old bulbs that shouldn't still work. A projector screen rolled down from the far wall. Then, the reel began. Grainy footage played, children boarding a train, laughing and waving at the camera. A conductor tipping his hat, parents waving from the platform. Then static, then screaming. The image snapped to black and white footage of the train, stopped at the very station he was in. People rushed around, confused. Something had gone wrong. In the middle of it all, standing silently, was the girl in the white dress. He watched, unable to look away. The screen went black. A single word flashed. Remember. The lights went out. The silence returned. Then a door creaked open behind him. slowly and saw stairs, new ones, made of clean concrete. Unlike anything else in this rotting place, they led upward, out of sight. Clutching the photo and suitcase, Thomas stepped forward. Each step creaked beneath him, but he kept going, feeling like he was climbing out of a dream, or deeper into one. At the top was a hallway, lit by fluorescent lights, dust-free, silent. On either side were doors labeled with numbers. Room 7, Room 8, Room 9. He stopped at Room 10. The door was slightly ajar. He pushed it open. It was a small bedroom, cozy, clean, with a single bed and a desk. Toys lined the shelves. A school backpack sat beside the door, and on the bed was a boy, sleeping. Thomas stepped closer. The boy stirred and opened his eyes. They were his eyes, but younger. The child sat up slowly, confused. "Dad," the boy whispered. Thomas froze. The child wasn't him. He was his son. But Thomas didn't have a son, did he? Memories stirred, painful and jagged. A life once lived. A child lost too soon. The train ride, the scream, the silence that followed. It all came rushing back. He collapsed to his knees, overwhelmed. Tears streamed down his face. The room began to shake. The walls cracked. The ceiling groaned. The hallway behind him darkened. The door slammed shut. The child stood now, holding the same red hoodie from the suitcase. "Come back," he whispered. "Please." Thomas reached out, but the world split around him. The floor vanished, and he was falling again, into the station, into the memory, into the truth. Thomas awoke on the cold floor of the train station, his breath shallow, heart racing. The suitcase and photo were gone. The warm, familiar room, the boy, had vanished like a dream, but something inside him had shifted. The memories were no longer whispers. They were clearer now, like old photos that had been buried too long under dust. He had been on this train before. He wasn't just a passenger. He was part of something much deeper. The girl in white, the boy, the other names on the table. It wasn't random. They had all been passengers on a ride meant to be forgotten. A low humming filled the air. He turned and saw it again. The train, the same ghostly locomotive, glowing faintly under the flickering station lights. Its doors were wide open. This time, it wasn't empty. Figures stood inside, faint, transparent, faces blurred, but postures familiar. Some looked straight at him. One even waved. He knew these people. They were from his childhood, neighbors, classmates, even a teacher from grade school. Each of them had vanished without a trace decades ago. One figure stepped forward. It was the conductor. His face was thin, lips pale, and eyes like polished glass. He held a clipboard and adjusted his cap, staring at Thomas like he'd been waiting for this moment. "You're late," the conductor said, voice hollow but firm. Thomas stepped cautiously toward the train. "Where is this going?" The conductor didn't answer immediately. He handed over the clipboard. Thomas read the top. Passenger Manifest, October 13th, 2005. His fingers trembled as he flipped through the pages. Each name had a timestamp. Most were marked departed, but several, including his, were labeled unresolved. Thomas looked up. "What does this mean?" "You boarded the train once," the conductor said, but you never reached the end of the line. Why? Because you weren't ready to face what happened. A high-pitched whistle pierced the air. The train began to shudder as if impatient. "You must finish the ride, Mr. Ridley," the conductor continued, "or this place will never let you go." Thomas hesitated. The air grew colder. He stepped onto the train. The doors closed behind him with a soft clang. The interior was dim, lit by old bulbs that flickered like candlelight. The seats were lined with velvet, worn but still intact. The figures sat silently, not moving, not speaking. The train lurched forward. Outside, the world blurred into gray. Thomas walked slowly down the aisle. As he passed each seat, the figures turned their heads toward him, one by one, acknowledging his presence without a word. It felt like judgment. He reached a booth near the center and sat. The seat across from him was empty, until it wasn't. The girl in white appeared. Up close, she looked about 16. Her hair hung straight to her shoulders, and her dress was stained with something dark, dirt, not blood. Her expression was calm, almost sad. "I remember you," Thomas said softly. "You should," she replied. "You left me here. I didn't mean to. No one ever does." He swallowed hard. "What happened that night?" The girl looked out the window. The landscape had changed. Rolling hills twisted into shapes that defied logic. Trees that grew upside down. Shadows that didn't belong. "You were 10, she began. "You and the others were on a school field trip. A simple ride through the countryside. But something went wrong. The train never reached its destination." "I remember a crash," Thomas whispered. She nodded. "But only you survived." Lump formed in his throat. "The others, gone," she said, "or trapped here in pieces of time, waiting for someone to remember." Guilt flooded him. He had buried the memory so deep, it had become a scar without a story. "I should have told someone," he muttered. "I should have remembered." "It's not too late," she said, "but you must go to the end, the place where it all stopped." She reached into her pocket and handed him a key, small, brass, with the number T10 engraved on it. "What's this?" "The conductor's cabin," she said. "That's where it ends." A loud screech tore through the silence. The train jolted. Lights flickered and then dimmed. The world outside turned pitch black. Thomas stood, key in hand, and moved toward the front of the train. The further he went, the colder it became. His breath turned visible, his steps slower. He reached the last door. He hesitated, then inserted the key. The lock clicked. The door creaked open. Inside was a small, dimly lit control room. Levers and gauges lined the walls, most covered in cobwebs and rust. But at the center was a large, leather-bound journal. He opened it. Engineer's log, October 13th, 2005. The last entry chilled him to the core. Signal failure. Emergency. Brake not responding. Entering tunnel at full speed. All passengers accounted for, except one. One child missing. Can't stop the train. Impact imminent. At the bottom, the engineer had written, "If anyone finds this, remember the children. Remember the ride." Behind the logbook was a cracked mirror. As Thomas looked into it, the reflection was not his. It was the boy again, his younger self. Tears ran down the boy's cheeks. "You left me," the boy whispered. Thomas Thomas reached out, placing his hand on the glass. "I'm here now," he said. "I remember." Suddenly, the mirror shattered. A rush of wind knocked him backward. The train screeched again, this time violently. The figures in the cars stood as one, and the lights turned red. The train was reaching its end. Thomas held tight to the cabin walls as the train roared forward, faster than ever. Then, silence, light, stillness. Thomas blinked against the sudden brightness. The train had stopped. He stood alone in the conductor's cabin, breathing heavily, hands still gripping the sides of the wall. Outside the shattered mirror, there was no darkness, just a pale white light flooding the windows like early morning fog. The stillness was overwhelming, yet strangely calming, like the hush after a heavy storm. He stepped out of the cabin and back into the passenger car. The ghostly figures were gone. The seats were empty now, dust-free and pristine as if freshly cleaned. The velvet cushions no longer looked old and faded, but new, vibrant. It was like the train had been reset or reborn. He moved through the aisles in silence, listening to the soft hum of the train's engine cooling down. At the far end, the exit door opened by itself. A stone platform waited outside, unfamiliar but inviting. Carved into the wall above was a single word: reckoning. Thomas hesitated, then stepped out. The air was crisp. The fog shifted around his feet as he moved forward. Beyond the platform lay an old tunnel entrance, covered in vines and moss, its metal edges rusted and barely holding together. Something about it called to him. He walked through the tunnel, guided only by instinct. The walls seemed to breathe. Shadows danced, not menacingly, but like memories coming alive. He saw glimpses, children laughing, teachers chatting, backpacks bouncing as they boarded the train that day so long ago. Then, flashes of the crash, sparks, screams, twisted steel, and silence. His younger self had wandered from the group. He remembered now, just before the crash. He had gotten off the train during a brief stop to chase a butterfly, unaware that it would be the last time the train would ever stop safely. That small, innocent moment had saved his life and doomed everyone else. He reached the end of the tunnel. A large iron door stood before him. On it, dozens of handprints were etched, small, childlike, glowing faintly in the dim light. He reached out and pressed his palm to the metal. The door opened. Inside was a vast chamber of mirrors, endless reflections of himself, past and present, staring back. Each mirror flickered with a different moment. His childhood, the day of the accident, the years of forgetting, and the terrifying return. One mirror began to glow brighter than the rest. He stepped toward it. Inside, he saw the platform from earlier, but filled with people. Children, teachers, parents. They stood, smiling softly, waiting. None of them aged, frozen in the moment they were lost. In the center stood the girl in white. "You brought the truth," she said. "I remembered," Thomas replied, his voice low. "Then you can set us free." A bright pulse surged through the mirror. The chamber rumbled. The other mirrors cracked one by one, releasing a burst of light with each fracture. The reflections of the lost began to fade, their faces finally at peace. "You weren't meant to carry this alone," she continued, but you were the only one who could return. What happens now? You go back and tell the world. Let them remember. She stepped forward and touched his forehead with a single finger. Goodbye, Thomas. The light engulfed everything. When he opened his eyes again, Thomas was lying on a cold bench. A modern train horn blew in the distance. He sat up, startled, disoriented. Around him, the once abandoned platform now looked new, polished. Digital signs flashed overhead. People walked past him, commuters, workers, even families with children, none of them aware of what had just happened. He was back at the station, but not the haunted one. He stood and noticed something in his hand, a brass key, 1310, still warm. He looked around and saw a small plaque near the platform's edge. In memory of the lost passengers, October 13th, 2005, never forgotten. His breath caught in his throat. The names were there, all of them. The passengers, the teachers, the girl in white, and at the bottom, Thomas Ridley, survivor. He hadn't imagined it. He really had gone back. A woman nearby noticed him staring. It's sad, isn't it? That old tragedy. They say a boy survived, but no one ever found out how. Thomas turned to her and offered a faint smile. Maybe it's time they did. He walked away, his footsteps light. The burden on his shoulders finally lifted. He would tell the story, the real story, about the forgotten ride, the lost souls, and the train that still waited for those who needed to remember. As he stepped out into the daylight, he glanced over his shoulder one last time. And for a split second, he saw it again. The train, silent, still, but this time, empty and waiting no more.